Good evening, everyone. Welcome, a very warm welcome to this UEA Lasdun lecture, and thank you so much for coming. It's wonderful to see you. My name is Professor Sarah Barrow, and I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Arts and Humanities at the University of East Anglia. We're so pleased to be back in London this year in the surroundings of this beautiful and historic venue, the Royal Institution. Welcome also to those many of you joining via YouTube. Thank you for taking part, and please do let us know in the chat where you're watching from. We're delighted to see so many alumni and friends of the university here this evening and look forward to chatting to you after the event. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to just make a small request of you all. We'll be sending out a tiny survey via email in the coming days, canvassing your views on tonight's event. It would really help us very much indeed in planning future lectures if you could take the time just to tell us what you think. A little plug here that we have a couple more upcoming events, one in May and again in June, and you can get further information about those afterwards if you haven't already got that. But first to tonight, our special event. This evening we're going to hear from Julian Barnwell, who is here, and UEA's very own Professor Claire Jowitt about the Gloucester shipwreck, Norfolk's very own Mary Rose. At the end of the presentations, we will of course be opening the floor to questions, of which I'm sure there'll be many. And those of you joining via YouTube can pop your questions in the chat, and we will try to take as many of those as possible before we finish. So to our first speaker this evening, Professor Claire Jowitt is Professor of Renaissance Studies in the Schools of History and of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing at UEA. She's published widely on maritime history and culture and travel writing. And funders for her work include the Arts and Humanities Research Council, Natural Environment Research Council, and the British Academy. She's currently historical lead for UEA's Gloucester project, funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and she co-curated the wonderful exhibition, The Last Voyage of the Gloucester, Norfolk's Royal Shipwreck, 1682, which is currently on display to great acclaim at Norwich Castle. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Claire Jowitt as she comes to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and it's truly wonderful to be here this evening. So I'm so pleased to be able to share with you some of the stories of the Gloucester. Tales of shipwreck, with their poignant blend of miraculous survival or of desperate loss, are perennially popular, expressing something elemental about human powerlessness in the face of the uncontrollable forces of the sea. On its last fateful journey to Edinburgh in May 1682, the third-rate warship, the Gloucester, was packed to the gunwales with passengers and with crew. It was also transporting this man, James Stuart, Duke of York and Albany, and heir presumptive to the British crowns, with his court. Here you've got him in 1672 in Roman garb, looking truly splendid in his fancy dress. He's Lord High Admiral at the time, and you can tell that with his theatrical style, but also the ships behind him. James was travelling to Scotland to complete royal business and to bring his pregnant wife, Mary of Modena, and his daughter Anne to reside permanently at his brother King Charles II's court. And Mary was his second wife. She married him when she was 15. He was in his 40s, and she cried when she saw him. She did then. It was a companionable marriage later. Off the East Anglian coastline, a fierce argument took place between the Duke and his naval officers over which course to take through the treacherous and difficult to navigate North Norfolk sandbanks. The Duke got his way, and the pilot, James Ayres, reluctantly followed the agreed course. Thinking they were past all danger, the pilot goes to bed at 5 a.m. on the morning of the 6th of May. The ship runs aground on sandbanks just 90 minutes later at 5:30 a.m. when everybody was still in bed. Now, when tragedy was struck, the Gloucester was packed, as I've said, with up to 270 crew and probably up to 100 passengers, made up of English and Scottish nobility and courtiers and their servants. James initially hoped that the ship could be saved, and he doesn't immediately abandon ship. But the ship is catastrophically damaged. It's taking in water, and James is finally persuaded to leave in a rescue boat, allowing others to get off. Royalty, then as now, has to get off first. Only 2 more ship's boats had time to launch. One swiftly overturns in the rough sea, and the other, overcrowded, narrowly avoids sinking. The scene was chaotic on the morning of 6th May. With the ship fast sinking, many passengers and crew ended up in the choppy waters. By 6:30 a.m., so in an hour, the ship's underwater, and it's estimated that between 130 and 250 people sadly died. The tragedy would have been much worse, even worse, if the smaller ships and yachts accompanying the Gloucester hadn't sent out their rescue boats to fish survivors out of the sea that morning. James survived, becoming King James II and 7th 3 years later in 1685. Since 2019, UEA has been working with Julian and Lincoln Barnwell, who, as you will hear shortly, after a long search, discovered the Gloucester wreck in 2007. UEA was invited by them to collaborate on their internationally significant project to conserve and display the Gloucester's unique collection of artefacts and to share knowledge about the ship's remarkable history with this and with future generations. As Sarah kindly said, our work is currently funded by a major grant from the Leverhulme Trust, and with Senior Research Associate Dr. Ben Redding, I'm currently writing a book about the ship's full career, including the wreck of the Gloucester 341 years ago off the Norfolk coast. In that book, we hope to tell the stories of all those on board the ship, from all classes, races and nationalities, and about women, creating as true and full a picture of the diverse range of passengers and crew on board as possible. We also want to understand the impact on the wider families who lost loved ones in the tragedy. Working for 3 years in secret under a non-disclosure agreement, finally in June 2022, the discovery of the Gloucester was publicly announced to worldwide interest. We had 2 wonderful days in the blazing sun on Great Yarmouth Beach, while the media feasted on Julian and Lincoln's amazing, once-in-a-lifetime story and on this important maritime discovery. The story, both of the wreck itself and of Julian and Lincoln's journey to bring it to public attention, has captured the public imagination. And at UEA, we've been privileged to, as Sarah said, co-curate with colleagues at Norfolk Museum Service the inaugural exhibition on the wreck, The Last Voyage of the Gloucester, Norfolk's Royal Shipwreck 1682, open now at Norwich Castle Museum and Art Gallery. And if nothing else, I hope today's talks entice you to come and visit us in the beautiful city of Norwich. So why does this history matter? If James, Duke of York, an heir presumptive to the throne, had drowned that morning, British history would have been profoundly different. It's likely either that Charles II's illegitimate son, Charles, has innumerable illegitimate children, no legitimate ones. Here is his eldest illegitimate son, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth. It's likely he could have become king when his father died in 1685. He could have become king when his father died in 1685, becoming a different King James II and VII. Or if not Monmouth, then James's daughter, Mary, would have inherited the throne with her husband, William of Orange. And again, you've got them represented here. If Monmouth had become James II, the Monmouth Rebellion in 1685, when Protestants rebelled against the new Roman Catholic King James Stuart, James II and VII, when he succeeded, which resulted in Monmouth being beheaded, would not have happened. Likewise, if Mary had become queen in 1685, the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688 would not have occurred. The 1688 revolution was a largely bloodless invasion and coup by Protestants William and Mary, resulting in the exile of Mary's father, James II. William and Mary's co-regency at the behest of Parliament changed the English monarchy forever, since it established the English Bill of Rights, which limited the powers of the monarch and set out the rights of Parliament. Our current system of government has its constitutional origins in that 1688 Bill of Rights, since it requires the Crown to seek the consent of the people as represented in Parliament. European history might also have looked profoundly different if young John Churchill, here he is in a glorious red coat, 32 at the time and on board as James's closest advisor on the Gloucester, if he had drowned that morning. His great victory against Franco-Bavarian forces in the War of the Spanish Succession at the Battle of Blenheim in 1704 might never have happened. Europe might have looked very different. So both the Duke of York's and Churchill's survival on the Gloucester after the Gloucester sinks in May 1682 matter to our island story. I'm just going to talk briefly about this very familiar painting, the painting used on our advert for tonight's talk, displayed in our exhibition in Norwich if you want to come and see it in person. The Wreck of the Gloucester by Dankerts, painted, we think, in 1682 by a Dutch-born painter, and it's probably the first picture created of the shipwreck. But how accurate is it? It shows the Gloucester striking a sandbank, yet records indicate it was the rudder at the stern of the ship that got caught. The damage to the stern was so severe it caused water to rush in at such an alarming rate, resulting in the ship sinking so quickly. The Gloucester's shown beached, though survivors' accounts say the sandbank was covered with 3 fathoms, over 5 metres, of water. The proximity in the picture of an extensive sandy beach suggests all crew and passengers on board will be saved. 3 men are shown praying on the sandbank, although it's unclear whether they're praying for deliverance or offering thanks for their salvation. One figure seems to be scrambling ashore while others abandon ship. The sea appears to be calm while other naval vessels sit impassively on the horizon, apparently taking no action to launch rescue boats or help the beached frigate. In fact, it was the rescue boats launched from the accompanying vessels, both ships and yachts, that saved most lives that morning as they fished survivors, quote, half dead, that's a quote from Samuel Pepys, who witnessed the whole thing, out of the sea. If Dankert's picture was an accurate record of events, then probably nobody would have lost their lives on the morning of the 6th of May, 1682. We know so many tragically did. In the left foreground, a densely packed ship's boat contains the Duke of York and other survivors. One of the criticisms levelled against James after the wreck was that his rescue boat was largely empty, intensifying the loss of life. Here, the boat is full. As the boat rose towards the waiting fleet in a calm sea, several men in red coats, which indicates that they are royal servants of the Duke. And remember, Churchill had a red coat in that picture. And other survivors are shown brandishing swords and other weapons. They are attacking victims of the shipwreck still in the water who are trying to clamber aboard the full boat. Amongst this bloody drama, James sits impassively in the stern. The picture is thus light and dark, asking, I think, its viewers to question what is represented, whether it is satirised spin or grisly reality of this deadly event. I want to finish by highlighting the two stories we tell in our exhibition. Working in partnership with Julian and Lincoln Barnwell, my fellow curators Ruth Battersby Took and Francesca Vanker from Norfolk Museums and Ben Redding, we are proud to bring together finds from the wreck site with loans from national collections and private lenders. These finds range from wine bottles with contents and ullage, that 17th century air, intact in them, to urine specimen jars, literally in one end and out the other. We are also privileged to share for the first time ongoing historical, scientific, and archaeological research associated with the wreck. We tell two stories in our exhibition, the first and second lives of this remarkable ship, launched in 1654, lost in 1682. The exhibition details the ship's long and varied naval service in key naval battles, such as the Battle of Sole Bay off the East Anglian coast in 1672. We tell the story of the tragedy of 1682 in forensic detail to respect the lives of those that died, encouraging visitors to explore how and why the wreck happened and whether anyone was to blame. As I've said, we have the most exceptional loans from national and international collections, which, when paired with the rescued artefacts, tell the story of a luxurious royal journey at sea that went horribly wrong. And I'm going to whiz through some of those artefacts, spectacles, discovered in a spectacle case that's still nestled with a little bit of velvet in it. Extraordinary. Bottles. 149 bottles have been rescued to date, 49 with some contents, 29 with full contents, including that 17th century air, pre-industrial air. Bones, no human remains, animal bones, foodstuffs. A button, absolutely beautiful. A trumpet mouthpiece. James didn't travel light. It took hours to load his baggage onto the Gloucester. He was also travelling with the King's music. Here we have a little piece of that King's music with a trumpet mouthpiece. They lost their silver trumpets. We know this because a few weeks later, an order is put in for more silver trumpets. textiles. These are extraordinary and exquisite. Silk. Silk is such a rare survivor. It doesn't do it justice here, but you can see the pattern. This is from, there's 2 petticoats, but there's also a hood. There is the most lovely, 17th century kind of cowl that goes over a lady's hair. And there's a picture from 1685 of James II's coronation where a herb woman is wearing just the right sort of outfit. Incredible survivors. Of course, on a ship, navigational instruments. Many of them have little notches on them or little initials. You don't want to lose. You don't want some other chap to walk off with your dividers. A bloodletting bowl. There were 3 medical men on board, so we don't know whose it was, but we know that the royal physician, Sir Charles Scarborough, was on board, going up. Mary was pregnant, and obviously precious cargo. He was there to make sure she got back intact, but he's also a great bleeder. It's him that's one of the medics that's often talked about as when Charles II has his last final illness. Rather than dying of the illness, he dies of bloodletting, and that's partly Sir Charles. Sir Charles also is 67 at the time of the wreck. He ends up in the water. It's him that Pepys describes as half dead, and he's alleged to fight for possession of a plank with one of the royal dogs, Mumper, and sadly Mumper does not survive, but Scarborough does. And here it is, as I said, in one end, out the other. Here is the urine flask. Again, maybe it was Scarborough's, maybe it was one of the other medical men, but looking at urine was a key marker of health in the 17th century, so we can just imagine that this was having heavy use, particularly because they were drinking so much on the voyage north. So, I'm going to finish. In the exhibition, we've commissioned a playwright to write a mini drama of the onboard argument over how best to navigate through the Norfolk sandbanks. This has been beautifully animated by iFilm, and the drama is voiced by our students from UEA. We are so proud of them. And it's like, Captain Pugwash goes mad. It's really great fun. We've also commissioned, again, an exquisite cutaway of the ship as it might have looked in 1682. And there is 2 little figures in the centre of the ship. That's supposed to be James, who's 5'11", and Churchill, who's about 5'8". So they are drawn to scale. So the second story we tell in the exhibition is the 21st century life of the Gloucester, which starts with the Barnwells' 4-year and 5,000 nautical mile search for this historic wreck. In this second story, we tell the narrative of the discovery and subsequent rescue of artefacts, their care and conservation, and the ongoing research projects seeking to interpret the significance of these finds. There's a 3D map of the wreck site and guided tour showing remains of timbers, cannon, and key areas made using 3D photogrammetry, images that were taken in 2022. We excitingly showcase for the first time the contents of 2 chests. We call them A and B, but that doesn't really do them justice, which have been rescued, containing the personal and professional items of, we think, passengers on board the Gloucester, and we begin to reconstruct the stories of their owners. And chest A, there's more than 100 items rescued. That's where the clothes, the textiles come from. But also, exquisite, I haven't got a picture tonight, it's got a leather pouch on it. And with this, I'm going to, a leather pouch in it, and with this, I'm going to finish. That leather pouch has on it 5 crowns stamped. And it's not just any old crown. This is the crown of St. Edward, the crown made by Charles II, for Charles II in 1661 for the coronation. And this is the crown that Charles III will wear in May this year. And with that, I will pass to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Claire. I loved that final moment. That was quite special. And of course, yes, I think we know that the coronation is taking place on exactly the same date or weekend of the anniversary of the loss of the Gloucester. But let's also welcome now Julian Barnwell, special guest. Julian and his brother Lincoln Barnwell are joint managing directors of the environmental award-winning printing company Barnwell Print, a successful family-run print business based just outside Norwich. Outside of work, Julian and his brother have spent decades diving wrecks off the Norfolk coast. The seabed of this part of the UK coastline is particularly rich, as I'm sure many alumni will remember, with shipwrecks from the First and Second World Wars. Nothing compares, however, to the discovery of the Gloucester that the brothers made in 2007 with their good friend James Little and their late father Michael. A discovery that has fascinated a global audience and one you have the honour to delight in right now. Over to you, Julian. Thank you. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. I'm very much looking forward to this, and I've got a few family stories, so bear with me. So keeping on the historical theme, I'd like to introduce you to Mum and Dad, Linda and Michael Barnwell. Both Lincoln and I were very, very lucky to have adventurous parents. Dad started diving in the late 60s. Mum was into powerboating, snow skiing, water skiing, so it was quite natural for us to start diving at a very young age. So massive influence and a big thanks to them. A few family shots for you. So top right, that's me at the age of 12, learning to scuba dive off the Norfolk coast, a place called Sheringham. In the middle, that's off Tobermory in Isle of Mull, with a small tadpole tank. A lot of hand-me-downs from Dad. We had to make our own wetsuits. So I was 12, but Lincoln is 4 years younger, so he started at 8. So he can claim that he was the youngest Barnwell to learn to dive, which he often reminds me about over Christmas. But we also got an octopus, which I'm going to introduce another theme later on about an octopus. But Dad was very good at catching lobsters and crabs, and we had many fond memories of the Norfolk coast, waiting for him to bring supper to us. But we loved our diving. One of our family holidays, would you believe, was to go on a shark safari course, and this was in South Africa. And this is a shot from a cage where me and Lincoln were lucky enough to be in the cage, and we were quite bullish and thought, oh, it's only a great way, we'll be fine. And as the shark swam closer, we both got closer and closer together and right in the middle of the cage with no fingers poking out whatsoever. But it was a great thing to do, and we were working with the South African Natal Shark Board, so we got to learn a lot about the lives of sharks, and it was a good family adventure. But our passion is the North Sea. Absolutely love diving off our coast. As mentioned earlier, thousands of shipwrecks. We've been diving since we were 16 in the North Sea. We were qualified for the British Sub-Aqua Club. And we got our own ribs. We were launching off sandy beaches. And we were using pretty basic equipment to find metal wrecks. But after a period of time, Lincoln wanted to do something different. And he's recommended to buy this excellent book written by Bridget and Richard Lamb. Would you believe they spent 9 years in Lloyd's researching all the shipwrecks of the British Isles? And this one volume is just the East Coast. So what happened? Lincoln got the book. He's working his way through the Norfolk coast, going back in time. Got to a wonderful page back in 1682, spied this magical word called cannon. I thought, oh, that's quite special. And then, not only that, as it got cannons, it had the future King of England, Duke of York, James. And I had no idea he got this book. He just phoned up and said, you're not going to believe this. We've got this amazing wreck in our playground, because that's how we saw the North Sea. He said, should we go and find it? I said, well, why not? Someone's got to. And it's exactly how it happened, all from this book. And being printers, we're particularly proud of that. So, of course, what that meant was we needed a bigger boat. And they were literally the words he said to me. So back in that day, I could actually get hold of a bank manager, and I managed to speak to our bank manager at Barclays and said, look, any chance of a marine mortgage? He said, yeah, we can sort that out, Julian, no problem. So time Lincoln had got to work, I already spoken to the bank manager, and he said, yeah, you can spend some money. So we bought an 11-metre survey vessel. Now, the reason we needed the survey vessel was because we're going from Lowestoft to the survey area, which is roughly 50, 60 miles, and we needed to use a magnetometer, because obviously the wreck hadn't been found, but we knew there was a lot of iron, and the magnetometer is the perfect piece of equipment to search for these particular wrecks. But what we were finding, many of the wrecks were buried. So, of course, we didn't know if that was the Gloucester. We just knew we had the perfect magnetometer reading. So we were recommended to go and meet this handsome chap called Tiny Little. Tiny had just rowed the Atlantic, which is a pretty good event in itself. And then we walked up his gangplank and said, hi, Tiny, we need to move some sand. And we hear you've got the boat. And here we have, another bigger boat. Tiny's an ex-submariner, ex-Royal Navy diver, and this is a support vessel for the Royal Navy, 24 metres. And we were having so much fun on board. But the joy of the vessel, the Dornoch, is we could have compressors, we could stay out to sea for 3 or 4 days, no problem. We could blend our own gases, and it meant we could actually move sand using airlifts. So it was pretty complex mooring systems, but what we ended up doing is finding a lot of 18th century shipwrecks, but we kept focused. I mean, they're pretty cool in their own rights, but it was all about the Gloucester for us, and that's what we kept looking for. And then, on this brilliant day, guess what happened? So we're back on our survey boat. This is in June 2007. As Sarah mentioned, we'd done 4,000 miles, and that wasn't all searching, it was travelling to site and back. Lots of many, many hours, lots of disappointments, and then we got the perfect mag reading. And what happened, normally Lincoln, being the better helmsman, the better captain, would stay up top. I'll be the one to go diving. And that's me in the water. But on this particular day, I'd had a hernia, and I still had stitches in my groin. I got all my gear on, I was about to stand up. It was a pretty messy day. It was raining, it was windy. It wasn't particularly, well, it was in the North Sea, of course. But what happened, I said to Lincoln, I can't go diving. So he ended up borrowing my gear to go diving on the perfect target and landed on the seabed surrounded by cannons. And that is an actual photograph of the Gloucester, one of her cannons. So we're up top, there's Tiny, me, and Dad, all getting beaten up, and Lincoln's having the best dive of his life with a good friend of ours, Andy. So he's the youngest diver, and he's the first to dive on the Gloucester. There's a few more wins for Lincoln in a little while. So what we always used to do, because we knew the sites potentially could be buried, we'd actually send something to the surface, and on this particular occasion, he sent a brick up. And I thought, a brick? What's he sending a brick up for? Well, he's excited about a brick, fair enough. Had no idea about the history of bricks. But what was particularly special, as I found out, is the brick that Lincoln had sent was from the galley, and it had no frog. So he was trying to send a message to us that we've got a really old site here. And then a few minutes later, a lead scupper popped up. And a lead scupper is part of the plumbing system, which it works on a deck, and it gets rid of all the excess water. So and Tiny recognised that and said, oh, this is looking good. But I have to say, I did say to Lincoln, if you go down there, then come back after dive, punch the air and say, oh, I found it, I'm going to give you a very rude sign. So we're always playing jokes on each other. So what happened, he finished his dive about an hour later, picked him up, gave the sign, yeah, we got it, you know, found a good sight. I gave him a rude sign back, and Tiny, me and Dad saying, he's put on our leg. He marched up our stainless steel ladders with all his tanks on, 20, 30 kilos of lead weight and diving gear, fully pumped up, walked across the stern, extended his hand and said, we've got her, and then fell over, which I really enjoyed. But we still didn't believe him, and we waited till our friend Andy came up and said, look, no, seriously, there's lots of cannons. But of course we didn't know it was the Gloucester. We just knew we had a historically important site, and the nice thing is Dad was with us when we found the site. So we need to get into the world of identification. So Kent is a 4-for-8 man of war, and sank in 1672. So the site, we didn't know it was English, it could have been a foreign flag, but it could have been potentially the Kent, or it could have been the Gloucester. And quite early on, we recovered a spoon, and we had this spoon drawn by one of our conservators, and hopefully you can make out, as I'm looking at it, yeah, the right-hand side, that's the date, 1674, taken from the maker's mark. So actually, the fact this spoon was dated 1674 and the Kent sank in 72 immediately said to us it's not the Kent. So that was a really good piece of evidence, but we still didn't have concrete proof. So we had this fantastic occasion in 2012 where, quite unusually, Link and I were diving together, and I was leading him towards the bow section because we'd seen quite a bit of dynamic erosion in the bows. And we passed in the galley, and I was just in front. And the next thing is I could feel him tugging on my fin and trying to communicate through his mouthpiece. Of course, what I'd done is I'd swam past the ship's bell. Lincoln had seen the ship's bell, so he can claim that he found the ship's bell. 3-0 to Lincoln. But that was such a moment for us because that was the smoking gun. We knew the heart of the ship. We knew normally you'd have a name on the bell, and we were really, really, well, euphoric is not the word. And that's the bell conserved. Absolutely stunning. When we found the bell, it was upside down, it was inverted, the cavity was full of concretion, and it weighed just over 19 stone. And so it was quite an operation to bring it to the surface, but we had it conserved. We even took the bell to a veterinary to have it x-rayed. We rocked up, carried this bell and had it x-rayed to make sure the cavity had nothing fragile in it. But it's it is the first thing you see in the exhibition. It's absolutely stunning. But for us, it had the date on, and the date was 1681. Unusually, it had no name, but it had 2 initials, WW, and there's a strong case that that's made by the Whiteman brothers in London, who had a connection with the Duke of York. But the fact it had 1681 was enough for all the officials to agree that we'd found the Gloucester. So over the years, we've done lots of survey work. This is us underwater. In the background, you can see many cannons. Generally, depending on the season, but most of the time, there's 20 cannons on the surface. We're expecting between 50 and 60. And the site is very compact. It's 50 meters by 30 meters, so we know there's lots of cannons still buried, which is a good sign. This is key. So these are several photographs of just the tip of an anchor palm. You can see the size of me and Lincoln at the top there. But what's been happening, at the left-hand corner, you can see quite a bit of the shank exposed, so we know the sound waves are moving through the site. So the site is at threat, it's at risk, and the sand is being exposed, and then if you look at the right-hand side, you can see the sand's backfilled. So that means lots of material is being exposed over the years, and what we've recovered and rescued is literally just from the surface of the seabed. Another comparison to show you how the site's changed. The top picture is an upright cannon, and then you can see that was around about 2010 with very light growth on, and then underneath the same cannon, that was taken last year, so you've got lots of anemones and a lot more growth, marine growth. But that cannon was dragged up by a beam trawler. He had a bit of a bad day and snagged the site because it's not on the chart, had a tug-of-war, clearly lost it, but in the process pulled up the cannon. And we know that because there's all nets and chain wrapped around the cannon. So that wasn't a good day for him. Back to the wine. They were definitely partying hard. We had a floating palace. They had an orchestra. They were celebrating the Duke's backing in the royal court. And there's a shot of Lincoln with one of our favourite bottles. And through the excellent work with Claire and Ben and the NMS team, we've identified the seal. So the seal is strongly linked, I think it's fair to say, work to be done, to Colonel George Legge, who was part of the inner circle for the Duke. And the coat of arms is the Washington coat of arms, we believe. It's got stars and stripes on. And this is the joy of the artifacts. You're learning so much more. Not only are they fantastic in their own rights, but you're getting behind the scenes, getting under the surface, literally, to find out who these are connected to. And every artifact has a story. So what is key is the archaeological work. It's about recording, it's actually understanding the site, what's at risk, and we've done lots and lots of work over the years with many scientific papers which still haven't been published, but they've been submitted to all the authorities. But we were introduced to Gary Momber and his team at the Maritime Archaeological Trust in Southampton. They're UNESCO compliant, they're internationally recognised, and very good company, good bunch of people to work with. So this is a picture of a chest. We talked about the sea chests, and you can see again on the surface bottles and rope and small artifacts. So we've always wanted to be professional divers. We're advanced BSAC divers, technical. We can do lots of decompression, blend our own gases, and it's been a bit of a boyhood dream to become professional divers. And there's a local company who we know very well, Alan Boswell, And there's a shot of Lincoln and I actually at the last stages of being qualified, HSC scuba. And the reason I have that there is a little bit of payback on Lincoln, and he is watching, so he probably hasn't heard me say this. So one of the drills we had to do in the quarry was I was asked to play dead by the supervisor. The other people on the course had no idea. So it was just me and the supervisor and the people who run the dive centre. So I was diving about 30 metres, we're all commed up with full face mask. And Mick, the supervisor, said, don't care what you say, don't mind what you do, just make it convincing. But if I come on the microphone and ask, Julian, are you okay? You make sure you tell me you're okay, because then I know everything's okay. Fine. I thought, great. What about Lincoln? No, you can't tell your brother. Ooh. So I was underwater, breathing heavily, complaining that I couldn't hear people, just generally becoming a bit of a nuisance and underwater, and the comms are trying to talk to me. Then I'm saying, well, I think we drank a bit too much wine last night because I'm going to be a bit ill underwater, and really building up the case. And they say, oh, my chest, oh gosh, my chest is starting to hurt. Oh, really building up. And I felt particularly bad because I knew Lincoln wouldn't take this too well. And what ended up happening was eventually I just made a lot of croaking and didn't say another word. At that point, I could hear in the earpiece that they were going to full drill, calling police, helicopters. So they were going through all the emergency procedures that we've been taught to do. And Lincoln's thinking, this is my brother, am I going to tell his wife, and so forth. So they dragged me up on the quarry shore. The next thing is they're ripping off my face mask, about to do mouth to mouth. At that point, I said, whoa, 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 I'm absolutely fine. Brother was not happy. Oh, he was not happy. So that was 3-1. But no, sorry, Lincoln. Right, I'm going to play a short video from Gary Momber. Now, you have to remember, Gary's worked all around the world. And this was taken last year doing a photogrammetry. So this is, not many people have seen this, so I'll just push play. It's only a short film.
Well, this shipwreck is pretty special. It's intact, but it's just full of so much material.
We found exposed bottles right underneath cannons, actually, so they look pretty cool sitting there.
So we've got guys from MAT with us today, Marine Archaeological Trust. We're doing some photogrammetry of the site.
Conditions look amazing. So we're going for a full photogrammetry coverage of the site, create a site plan in maybe 1 or 2 dives.
We're on Hesper Sands, because we're on low water at the moment. You're only going to have a couple of metres max. Just evaluating the best way to cross at the moment. So we're now watching the buoy that we just deployed, and behind that you'll see a current. And as you get closer to slack, the weight gets less and less and less, and then we know it's okay to dive.
We'll be taking 2,000 photographs each across 2 cameras, so that should enable us to stitch all that together for a 3D model of the scene from photographs.
We're measuring areas that are very dynamic. At the stern, there's a big drop of about ½ a metre of sand has been eroded away, swept away, and that, unfortunately, is where all the bottles have been found, so we're not sure how much has been lost.
You can see which areas are vulnerable, which areas have got really interesting material to actually address research questions you have for the site.
We had a cracking day today. Visibility was about 6, 7, maybe more metres. Gradually cleared away. It's looking great, and you can see a lot more of the wreck, and you can really understand the potential of the site. This is really by far the most significant wreck we've ever dived on.
So what we ended up doing on that afternoon is creating a photogrammetry. And this is the actual wreck site with all the photographs stitched together. And you can see, hopefully, the cannons, which are leaned, as the ship settled, all the cannons are rolled to the starboard side. And there's a small anchor in the middle, which we generally tie our lines to. The stern is to the left and the bows is to the right. And that's a lot of material on the surface there, but we know for a fact that the stern section, there's a cannon goes straight down, and the cannons are generally, well, they are 3 metres. So there's a lot of sand, potentially trapping a lot of hull and a lot of artefacts. And that's what we need to be working on as soon as possible for the charitable trust. But we did a 2018, another photogrammetry, so that's giving us a lot of evidence, a lot of comparison to see what's changing over the site over the years. And all this gets put into the management plan, which we work very closely with Historic England and Navy Command on. But a key piece of work. Going back 6-7 years, we used to do all this by hand and lots of swimming and measuring, and so much easier with a camera. It really is fantastic. And that's in the exhibition in the castle. And it's a 3D diver trail, so you see all the contours. But it's, yeah, nice piece of work. Okay, so as Claire mentioned, we went public last year. We timed it well. We had the right people around us. We've got Lord Danett as our chair, and the UEA and Norfolk Museum Service working closely with Navy Command. And we kind of knew we'd be right with the local news, we'd be right with the local newspapers, but it went worldwide. As Claire said, 2 days, absolutely fantastic. Friends in New Zealand ringing up, you just made the national news. Australia, Thailand, everywhere. It was just incredible. And the media really picked up on the heritage, which is so important to us. And yeah, we're doing interviews back to back on the radio. And again, when we went public about the exhibition this year, it's been well embraced and well covered by various media. But here is back to the octopus. So would you believe, I've been diving for over 40 years and I've never seen an octopus off the Norfolk coast before. And Brandon, who just saw a few minutes ago, just as we finished the photogrammetry, took this picture of this fantastic creature. So that's our lucky mascot called Gloucesterpus. Back to the exhibition. This lady, the first opening was the 25th of February, and Link and I were there to say hello to people. And this lady was the first person, Helen, to go and see the show, so we got a picture with her, which is a nice moment. And inside the galleries, that's the bell, so that's the first thing that greets you. On the right-hand side, we introduce you to the brick and the story of the brick. But the design is fantastic. It's been laid out like a ship, and you'll see lots of bottles, fantastic paintings, brilliant history. And then as you go towards the end of towards the back of the exhibition, there's the story about us as an 18-minute documentary, a few Norfolk jokes, which I think people are finding funny by all accounts. And also there's the diver trail, and we're talking about the future and what we're doing and what we've done to date. And there's people looking at the chests, you know, the silk and the personal artifacts. I think you're in that, Mark, actually. And there's the bell. Never tire looking at the bell. That's just absolutely fantastic. And that's still about 14 stone, 15 stone, thereabouts. And it's you can see where the sailors have polished it. You know, they started to wear part of the rims down. But it's a beautiful, beautiful artifact. And that is the catalogue, which I hope if you do go, you'll buy, because it's fantastic value, brilliant, brilliant narrative there, and it tells the whole story, and a bit about the science we've done on the wine, but we're very proud, and everybody's done justice to the story of the Gloucester and who served on board. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is me. Thank you.
Amazing, incredible. Just a little fragment of what you can enjoy if you are able to go up to see the exhibition. But thank you so much for sharing the film with us as well. That was extra special. Thank you both so much for a wonderful and engaging evening. I really want to thank you for your time and continued commitment to coming out and telling the story of the Gloucester so far. Obviously, Claire and Julian in particular spend so much time working on this project, but love telling the story. So thank you for being here as well. I'm sure there'll be a few questions, and we do have time for a few. So please just pop your hand up and a member of the events team will come and reach you with the mic. And if you're on YouTube, please join in by using the chat function, and I'm sure somebody will tell me if there's a question coming on the chat. Thank you. Okay, I can see a question straight away, or a hand up straight away in the middle there. So please, if somebody could find this gentleman, and over to you.
Thanks very much for a fantastic talk. I was going to ask if you found anything left of the fabric of the ship itself. Was there anything left of the hull, or anything else for that matter?
Good question. So we've seen the centre keel band is exposed. Also stanchion posts. There's a couple there towards the midships near the galley area. We have occasionally seen some ribs sticking out. But at the moment, we haven't done the key excavation work to see how much hull there is underneath the sand. You generally don't lift timbers for the sake of lifting timbers like they did with the Mary Rose. But if there's particularly a carved stern section, you'd have a special case and create a project to do that. So we're really excited about that opportunity, and that's what next year's work will be.
Thank you. Is there another question? Yes, at the front here. Thank you. We will just wait for the microphone, just so everybody online can hear you as well. Thank you.
Hello. Great talk, actually. With the tremendous loss of life, have you found any human remains, bones, or are you expecting to? I went to see the Mary Rose exhibition a few years ago, and they had found skeletons there, and they'd managed to relate them to particular people on the boat, you know, describe them. Do you expect to do that sort of thing?
Yes, so we haven't found any human remains, but we are expecting there will be, and you're quite right, you can learn so much from the DNA and the bones and what nationalities are on board. And there's a very good policy written by Historic England on how you work with the coroner and what you do with that. And that will be worked into, and now in the process of finishing off a management plan, and a project design plan covers all these eventualities. But because the ship sank so quickly, and as Claire mentioned, quite a few people drowned, a lot of people would be trapped in the ship, and I believe the cook was a good example, wasn't it? Potentially.
Possibly. If people got trapped behind heavy objects, such as cannon, then it's possible that there could be bodies there. Unlike 16th century ships, which were netted, 17th century ships aren't netted, so a lot of the bodies could have potentially escaped. You know, with the forces as the ship was sinking, and we know that bodies were washed ashore. So it's possible that remains could be found, but it's less likely than with a 16th century ship.
Thank you very much. I think I spotted a hand up here. Yes, the gentleman a few rows back.
Thanks very much. I was just wondering, when you're diving off the Norfolk coast, bearing in mind a number of US airfields in World War II, which were sort of mentioned, whether you come across aircraft wreckage as well from time to time?
We have found a Spitfire engine, which was just off the Shetland coast, and there's an engine and some blades. But generally, as you're probably aware, aircraft are quite hard to find, and the impact, they generally get destroyed. But no, we're not aware of any aircraft that has been found, apart from the Spitfire engine.
We have a question online, so we'll take that one first, and then we'll come to the gentleman at the back. Thank you. So, Hannah. Oh, you need the mic. Thank you to those joining us online. Brilliant.
Thank you. So, I've got a few, but I'll start with, how do you avoid sand covering the site and limiting future recovery?
Okay, well, you can't beat the natural forces. So what we've seen through multi-beam surveys, the wreck creates a mound, and the sound waves are migrating through the site, and it changes from year to year, and sometimes from spring tide to spring tide. So what you do is you monitor that, you measure that, keep recordings, and you build up a case of what area is most at risk, and that's the area that the archaeological work will start on. You can use sandbags, strangely enough, to reinforce certain areas that you're worried about, but actually you can't, basically. You're up against tides and nature. Yeah.
Especially in that North Sea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go to the gentleman there and then come back to a question online. Thank you.
Thank you. With such a long-running project and so many stakeholders now involved, can you explain a bit about the legal status of the wreck and your role as, forgive me for saying this, amateur divers? I'm thinking of the film that was made a few years ago about the Viking longship, and how the authorities, I believe it was in Ipswich, about a million miles away, took ownership. But this was back in the 40s, obviously. But can you explain about your role going forward, and who owns it, and how do you keep it secret?
Oh, Lots
Careful
there.
what you
Lots
say.
there. Yeah, well, it's still a secret. We'd never mentioned depth because we don't want to give clues on where to look. So we've been working very closely with all Navy Command, English Heritage as they were, DCMS, and been reporting since 2010, 11. And policies have been rewritten and adjusted because we're in international waters, which makes the legal question very complicated. But there's this clear policies now from 2018 onwards, which we're working to underneath the UNESCO agreement, and that's why we've got Gary Momba and his team. But the status is it's a sovereign immune ship. So the Navy, they never abandon their vessels, and that's the blanket umbrella that we all operate under. There are eyes in the sky. We're diving every opportunity we can, and we always leave a certain object, shall we say, so we know if the site's been interfered, because that person or somebody would definitely move it. So we're comfortable. The gamble is when you go public, you make it aware that actually the site can be found. But actually, when you weigh up the publicity, the goodwill that's been shown, we're developing an exemplar project with Navy Command, which we're very proud of, and the archaeological community, and the research and education is so important. But we're at the stage now where we have Lord Danett, and we have one of our vice patrons here as well, and trustees. We've got a great team around us, so it's all about getting the ship into a charitable status so we can raise some serious money, because unfortunately working underwater is very, very expensive. I mean, we're talking 7 figures per season. But we're very relaxed and comfortable. And the Sutton Who, I think it was, with the movie. And we are very much in the middle of all conversations. We're very comfortable with everybody around us. And we've always made it clear this is a Norfolk story. And it's going to end up in Norfolk, but it's for the nation. Okay.
Thank you. Great question. And I think we have a follow-up, perhaps, just directly underneath. If you wouldn't mind just waiting for the mic.
Sorry, this isn't a direct follow-up, but I'm very curious about the dispute between the captain of the Gloucester and the future king. How do we know about that? Who recorded the dispute? I have to say that James II comes out of it, I suspect, very badly. I've never liked James II, and this confirms that impression.
Your instincts are right.
Well, history's often written from the side of the winners, isn't it? So post 1688, I think James does get kind of pushed to one side. What happens is recorded by the captain, John Berry, in his notes. Obviously, there's a report that has to be given. This is a major tragedy and a major disaster, a key asset. This ship had been looking tippy-top. It had just been refitted. There's 2 court-martials afterwards. So Berry records it. There's another captain, Christopher Gunman. He's the captain of one of the yachts. He also writes an account because he's one of the individuals that were court-martialed. There are a number of popular accounts that are written. Pepys talks about what happened. The newspapers of the time catch hold of this. The heir to the throne was almost killed. It's a major tragedy. This is a cause célèbre of the time. So there's actually a lot of accounts. Not only was the ship full of individuals, many of whom then write about it, but there were a huge number of witnesses because there were a number of smaller ships and a number of yachts that see all this happening. So there's a lot of accounts. But yes, we know in some detail that there was a big debate, a big argument over which course that they should take, and that the pilot, James Ayres, wanted them to take what's called the Collier's route, which is to hug the coast, so that they could see key landmarks, safe but slow. The master of the ship and gunmen and other naval officers are saying, let's take the deep sea route, go far out, again, into the deeper water. again, a bit slower. James is a man in a hurry. He wants to get back to Scotland to get his wife. He's just gone through the exclusion crisis, and now suddenly he's back in the sun within the court. He's been temporarily in London. He says no. He knows this area. He's been fighting there in the 1670s in various battles, and in the 1660s, that they can pick their way through, and that's what happens.
Great, thank you. You brought that alive. Do we have time for one more online? One more? Yeah, go on then.
Okay, it's a quick one, and it's probably for Julian, which is, what does netted mean?
Well, you mentioned netted, but I know what it means. But do you want to cover it?
No, go for it.
Well, you're talking about on the decks.
Yeah.
So basically, around the top deck, you'd have protection net. I'm guessing is where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yes. So not fishing nets, safety nets.
Yeah. So that was the ships after.
Earlier.
16th
century.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I think it's a gentleman up there.
Oh, very final one. I'm not looking at my colleagues. We take one more. Oh, hold on, if you wouldn't mind, for the mic, so colleagues online, guests online can hear.
I just
you.
wanted to come back on the point about the dispute between effectively the Crown and the Navy. And it seems that the Navy's position has prevailed. I'm just intrigued by that. So apart from the naval records, how was the Crown's voice recorded? How do we know the King's position in this dispute?
Afterwards, there is the Tory propaganda goes into overdrive that this is the miraculous survival in terrible conditions of the heir to the throne. For instance, there is a commemorative medal struck very quickly, and it has a little Latin tag on it, which translated means they strike him undismayed. And the person that is undismayed, that shows fortitude, is James here. It shows rocks, again, like the Dankert's picture, which is a kind of sanitised spin that you'd think that nobody would have died because there was a beach there. Here, there is a rocks that you would imagine that everybody would have escaped onto. There are ballads celebrating James and his poems. There's music. Purcell writes music celebrating James. So there is, on the one hand, there are, as you say, the naval records that tell a slightly different story, but on the other hand, the public perception of this is you've got to light bonfires, you've got to fire cannon to celebrate that James has survived. There's one account even that says that even as the poor crew are drowning, that they let out a big huzzah because James has been, survived.
Gotta love them, haven't you?
If you visit the exhibition, you have the chance to vote for who you think was to blame. Imagine who's getting the blame so far. Yeah, it's a really good thing. Actually, it's fairly even, because the story is told in a very even way. That's all we have time for. Can I say a huge, great thank you to Julian and Claire? Should we give them a round of applause now? Thank you.
Well done.
I'd like to thank all the teams who've put this event together so splendidly. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our online audience for joining us. We will have a look at any further questions afterwards and try to see if we can respond to those. And to our London audience, if you have time, please do join us for a little drinks reception in the library where we can chat some more. Thank you.
Okay. Lovely.